Stacy Lynn Harp is coaching with heart. Thank you for listening to this audio presentation. To learn more about Stacy and her coaching services, visit stacylharp.com. That's STACYL harp.com.
Welcome to this edition of Coaching with Heart, everyone. I'm so glad that you have tuned into our discussion now on how to overcome fear and anxiety. For the last couple of shows, what we've been doing is we've been discussing at the top of the show what I'm calling our anchor scripture, which is from 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. And I'm going to read it to you again, just to refresh your memory. It's the following. This is Paul. He wrote to the church in Corinth, and this is what he said. He said, "We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ." And just like I said in previous shows, here we have a sandwich. On each end, we have what we are to do in Christ, and in the middle, we have why we're doing it. So we are destroying speculations. That's what we're doing in our minds, because that's where the battle is. We speculate, we ruminate, we obsess, we do all of these things, and this is where the fear and the anxiety comes in our minds. And so we are told to destroy these things. Why? Because they are raised up against the knowledge of God. And they're lofty, which means that they're high. And it means that we're putting that above the knowledge of God. So what are we to do? We are to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. So we have to destroy the speculations. And, I really just want to hammer that into your head because I think it's something that so few people discuss, and we really gloss over it. So I think it's really important. I'm just going to keep repeating it, probably for a few more days. But I really want to encourage you to memorize this verse, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. Check it out in other Bible versions, translations than what I'm reading it to you in. It comes out a little bit different words are used, but the same message is there. And so as Christians, we want to be a captive. We want to be obedient to Christ. We want to be a slave to Christ. We don't want to be a slave to the obsessive fear or the anxiety that creates. And so I just want to encourage you in that. Now today what I'm going to do is, this is going to be more of a clinical type show, and it's going to be brief. Just going to tell you that right now. We're not going to dig into each of these very, very deeply because we don't have the time for that. And this isn't a grad psych course that you're in. This is a little coaching show. So what we're talking about today, though, is 8 specific categories of anxiety disorders. And let me just remind you that something becomes a disorder when it interferes and prevents you from living a normal life. So this disorder, in order to become a disorder, it has to become so intense in your thoughts, and your feelings, and your actions that it prevents you from living a normal life. That's when a clinically trained therapist will then classify you with some type of disorder. Well, as it turns out, the DSM-5, this is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, has recently come out, but I don't have a copy of that. But I do have a copy of the DSM-4 TR. Just so you know, the DSM-4 TR stands for the revised edition, because the DSM-4 came out and then they revised it, so they put TR after it. So in the DSM-4 TR, it turns out that in the section on anxiety disorders, that section alone is almost 60 pages long, okay? So we have a pretty big book within the DSM, which is already a really big book, but within that book, we have about 60 pages, almost 60 pages dedicated to the topic of anxiety and the different variant forms of anxiety. And so here's what they are, and I'm just going to go through this relatively quickly. The first one is phobias, and tomorrow in our program we're just going to look at that specifically. So I'm not going to focus on that today at all. I'm just going to tell you that this is something that we're going to look at just tomorrow in phobias. But then we also have panic disorders, and we're going to look at that a little bit as well, because panic disorders can often be combined with panic attacks. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what a panic attack is, what constitutes a panic attack, as well in a different show. Also, within the category of anxiety disorders, we have obsessive compulsive disorders. And, it's interesting because in modern day society, we have movies that have shown us these disorders. And a lot of people are aware of some of the typical obsessive compulsive disorders. I would have to say hand washing is probably the most well-known obsessive compulsive disorder, but I would also point you to television shows like Hoarders, which kind of show some of these particular obsessions and things that can come about. I think that would fall for many of those people. I look at TV shows like Hoarders, and I look at a lot of that as just anxiety. Because typically, if somebody is anxious, they tend to nest. And how do people build nests? They have a lot of junk, or they have a lot of things, disorder, literally around them. And I don't know if you've ever thought of it that way, but if you are somebody who tends to clutter, if you're a clutter bug, generally, I think that can be, not always, but it can be indicative of your emotional state, how you feel inside, how you process things. And so obsessive compulsive disorders is a form of anxiety disorder that is no laughing matter. I have friends who've suffered with this. I myself, on probably a pretty minor level, have certain things, not behaviors per se, but just the obsessive thoughts that I have to really focus on, take captive. And so that is a very real thing. But here's the thing, as a Christian especially, you have the power within you to stop that and to walk in victory and not allow those obsessive thoughts and behaviors which reduce anxiety. It's kind of a vicious cycle. You have the power to overcome those things. So that would be the third one. The fourth one is anxiety due to a medical condition. And this is really important because clinicians, when they're trained, or at least when I was trained, and I hope that it's most clinicians, typically when a client comes into you as a therapist, one of the first things that you do after you assess that client is you find out what it is that they're dealing with. And if they tell you it's anxiety, well, then one of the first things you want to definitely rule out is a medical condition. Because there are many things that can create anxiety within your body, just physiologically. For example, just one example I can think of off the top of my head is if you're anemic. If you're anemic, you suffer from anemia, then you can be anxious because your body is not producing enough oxygen to create the red blood cells and the blood that you need in order to have enough oxygen for you to breathe. And if you're feeling like you can't breathe, then guess what? Then you obsess about, oh my gosh, I can't breathe. And then next thing you know, you have a panic attack. And I say this from personal experience because for many years, when I was in therapy for myself, that is exactly what happened to me. Exactly. And it wasn't until I finally went to a doctor and I got some blood work and they came back and they said, guess what? You are anemic. You are almost to the point where you're passing out. And that actually was true. And so it's always good to get a medical evaluation. And also sometimes medication can also create anxiety. If you take medication, one of the things that you do, hopefully, is you look at the side effects that medication can create. Sometimes anxiety is that. Sometimes anxiousness, dizziness, rapid heartbeat, things like that. Things that can physically create anxiety. So a therapist will definitely look at that stuff. They'll evaluate it, and then probably in their case notes, they'll go, okay, you have anxiety due to a medical condition. It's not really something in your mind. And for a lot of people, if that ends up being the case, I know in my case, when that ended up being a big part of the case, I was like, oh my gosh, really? Okay, so I'm going to take some iron supplements, and guess what? It helped out. So sometimes anxiety can be resolved with something that simple if you know what steps to take. So the next category of anxiety disorder that pretty much everybody has probably heard of at this point is post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is a well-known anxiety disorder because typically men and women who've been in military have suffered from PTSD, which is what it's commonly known as. Also, victims of rape, sexual abuse, and other types of trauma can also suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. People also who've been in car accidents, burn victims, any type of event, like catastrophic events like we've seen, victims of terrorist attacks, can definitely suffer from PTSD. And I have to tell you, what's really encouraging about PTSD is that it's extremely treatable and people can definitely overcome it. And again, this is something that I personally dealt with for a number of years. Praise God. It's interesting when I look at my own issues with anxiety and anxiety disorders. Some of my anxiety was caused due to a medical condition. Other was caused due to sexual trauma, which I've shared before in previous shows. And it's neat to know that for me personally, as I went through the years I went through in counseling and really seeking out the Lord for healing in this area, it's neat for me to honestly be able to share with you at the times when I thought I was going crazy because of the different things that I was going through. I can look back now and go, oh wow, God brought me through this severity, and then it got less and less and less and less and less. So post-traumatic stress disorder is no laughing matter. It's very difficult to get through, but I did it, and I know that many others can get through it. This is typically also, in many cases, treated with medication. And most of these disorders are often treated with a low dose of something like lorazepam or Ativan, which your general practitioner can give you. It can also be treated with natural supplements as well. And those type of things, you can search those out online and figure out what those are. So, so first we've looked at different phobias. We're going to be looking at those tomorrow. Panic disorders. We're going to look at a panic attack and how that plays out a little bit later. Obsessive compulsive disorders, anxiety due to a medical condition, PTSD. And then the next three are acute stress disorder, which I think you all know when you're under stress, it's very easy to be anxious. And so that's pretty self-explanatory there. Number 7 would be generalized anxiety disorder. And what this is, and this is actually something I was diagnosed with as well. As I got better, my PTSD really kind of evolved into generalized anxiety disorder, where for me personally, it was like, okay, I'm just living in a constant state of fear. It's where there's always anxiety no matter what. And it's like a low grade type, just enough to annoy you in your life, just to show you that it's there. But the good news is it's very treatable. And typically, most therapists treat a client with generalized anxiety disorder with cognitive behavioral therapy or with medication of some type. So generalized anxiety disorder is pretty common, and that's our 7th category. Our last category is substance-induced anxiety. And this might be a surprise to some of you that substances that you can consume actually create anxiety. I'm going to tell you one substance pretty much everybody consumes, and that's caffeine. How many of you out there drink your coffee in the morning? Even if it's decaf, guess what? You got caffeine in it. If you can't live without your caffeine or your chocolate and you're anxious, guess what? You could be diagnosed with substance-induced anxiety disorder. There are types of other things too. Nicotine. I know a lot of people, and this is the part that really, it's very fascinating to me. Many people who smoke cigarettes will tell you that they do it because it calms them down, right? My mom, she was somebody who smoked, and that's what she told me. She said, I do it to keep myself calm. But the truth is, nicotine, that doesn't calm you down. It actually is a stimulant. So really, when somebody's smoking and inhaling all this stuff, they're really not calming their bodies down, even though they think they are. I think of my mom in particular, because my mom was a very anxious, obsessive, compulsive type. Of course, I didn't know this growing up, but as an adult looking back, I go, oh my gosh, my mom was, my mom had all these things. And she did. My mom was obsessive compulsive. She cleaned constantly. Everything had to be clean. My mom drank caffeine for breakfast in the morning, but then she'd also smoke. So she'd have a Pepsi and cigarettes for breakfast. I'm not kidding you. So my mom, she was like the epitome of an anxiety disorder, Oh my gosh, there she is. She's a walking anxiety disorder. And it's funny because it's not listed here on the list, but I can tell you, children can definitely pick up the energy from their parent. If the parent is anxious, guess what? You're going to have an anxious child. Animals, same thing. Very sensitive animals can pick up your anxiety or your depression for that matter. Okay, so really that energy that you give out, positive and negative, that really can impact other people. So anyway, the last category here, as I said, is substance-induced anxiety. So it's really important for you to get a hold on what type of anxiety disorder that you may have. And obviously, if you want to know, then I would recommend seeking out professional medical help in the form of a marriage and family therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Who can potentially give you medication if that's something that you so desire to be on. My personal opinion is medication helps in some cases. I personally think it should be a last resort, and there are many reasons for that, but that's my personal opinion. And so today, that's what we just did. We just looked at 8 main groups of anxiety disorders. Anxiety is a very common problem, as you know. And if you are somebody who deals with anxiety, let me just encourage you and just tell you a couple of things. Number 1, you are not alone. Number 2, you can overcome it. Number 3, overcoming it takes time. You have to be disciplined and you have to really, really want to have the control over it as opposed to it controlling you. And these are things that take time to learn, but they are very, very possible. And I say that as somebody, like I said, for years, who struggled with major anxiety. And I had numerous types. I suffered from panic attacks, post-traumatic stress disorder. Because of my medical condition being very anemic, I was anxious, and then generalized anxiety disorder. And to be honest, if I had to say that I deal with any type of anxiety today, I would say that I would put it on the very low end of generalized anxiety disorder. And not even a disorder. It's not a disorder anymore in my life. But I know if I'm not careful with it, and if I'm not taking every thought captive, it can be. It can be a disorder and interfere in my life. Just turns out, fortunately, that it doesn't. And some things as simple as going for a 10-minute walk every single day can reduce your anxiety, regardless of what type it is. So just keep that in mind. If you're somebody who struggles with that, watch what you eat, watch your caffeine intake, watch your substances that you bring in, and consider dealing with undealt with trauma if you think you suffer from post-traumatic stress and you have all that stuff going with it. There's a lot that really goes into this, which is why there's almost 60 pages here in the diagnostic manual therapists use. So it can be complicated, but it can also be very simple. This I know, though, that you can take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, and you can overcome it.
Thank you for listening to this audio presentation. To discover more resources from Stacy Lynn Harp, clinically trained marriage and family therapist and biblical coach, visit stacyl.harp.com. That's STACYL Harp.com. Coaching with Heart.